Hello everybody. Although the very first video games I played were the Pong in the arcades and then of course Atari, the first actual console that I owned as a child was in fact the Nintendo Entertainment System, the original NES. I played games such as Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Bros., Metroid, Mega Man, Legend of Cage, so on and so forth. Later, I'd go on to get a Sega Genesis, a PlayStation, so on. But to say I got my start with Nintendo would be fair. You could call me a Zelda fan in the sense that I'd played the whole franchise, and well, even Skyward Sword I played. I don't necessarily own the consoles to which on, but I have, through the generosity of friends, managed to play all of them. And you know what? If it weren't for Nintendo's policies regarding how they monetize YouTube videos, I would have a lot more Zelda content on my channel. But considering how Nintendo operates, that simply isn't the case. We'll get into that policy a little bit later on. But all said and done, Nintendo has been a rather childish company. I don't mean that they make kids games. I mean that they have a long-standing history of screwing over third-party developers and fans alike. Now, first and foremost, we're going to have kids who are screaming, "Well, who cares as long as I get the new Pokemon or Zelda game?" You guys can go home now. This video isn't for you. Now, I'll get to screwing over the fans later, but as for the industry itself, behind many of the things that have gone on in the gaming industry, there is in fact Nintendo playing foul. Here to talk about one such example is Digital Boundaries.
It could be argued that the most impactful example of Nintendo playing foul in the gaming industry was when Nintendo approached Sony about making a rival to the upcoming Sega CD. Sony had already made the Audio FX chip for the SNES, so they had a business working relationship. So Nintendo thought it was a good idea. They were going to sell two versions. One, an add-on to the SNES called the SNES CD, and an upgraded version of the SNES that had the CD drive integrated called, 3 words, Nintendo PlayStation. Yes, you heard me right, Nintendo PlayStation. Ken Kutaragi had previously pitched a game console to Sony and they rejected it, saying they weren't a toy company. Now, having an excuse to do what he wanted to do, Ken hopped right onto the Nintendo PlayStation project and Sony happily let him. It was greenlit and the cooperation between the two companies began. However, while Sony worked on this new technology, Nintendo began to have second thoughts. The original business agreement bothered them, as they wouldn't have the rights to the CD technology and the CD printing rights, meaning instead of Nintendo making most of the money, it will be shared between the two companies. While indicating to Sony that their partnership was still good to go, Nintendo encouraged Sony to build a prototype for them while secretly contracting their rival Philips. So, fast forward to 1991 at the Computer Electronics Show, CES. Sony, unaware of Nintendo's upcoming betrayal, announces the Nintendo PlayStation. At the same time, Nintendo announces that they're working with Philips to create CD technology. This was a huge betrayal and a waste of resources on Sony's part developing the thing. Ken goes to his bosses, and the same people who told him that they don't make toys, now feeling the sting of having been lied to and betrayed by Nintendo, agreed to let Ken make his Sony PlayStation. I think you may have heard of it. Some former developers say they developed the Sony PlayStation with the sole purpose of taking Nintendo's betrayal and beating them at their own game, and that they're only allowed to do it originally for revenge, although it would go on to become one of the most profitable ventures Sony has ever done. And the rest is history.
Enough! My ship sails in the morning. I wonder what's for dinner.
Ever wonder what happened to that Philips CD device they were going to make for Nintendo? It turns out that not even Philips could stand working with Nintendo, and after too many demands, their partnership ended in mutual dissatisfaction.
You've killed me! Good.
Unlike Sony, however, whom started to work on hardware before even signing any agreements, Philips was smart enough to get contracts in place where they could use Nintendo's intellectual properties, especially Super Mario Bros.
Nice of the princess to invite us over for a picnic, eh, Luigi? You know what they say, all toasters toast toast.
And The Legend of Zelda.
How about a kiss for luck?
You've got to be kidding.
Back to you, Zarek.
Thanks, DB. Nintendo would go on to enlist the aid of Rare in creating a game for the Super Nintendo featuring Donkey Kong. The game they created would be called Donkey Kong Country, a game that was critically acclaimed for having realistic graphics that looked 3D. You see, what allowed Rare to do this was they would render 3D models on a super expensive high-end rig. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars in value at the time, and then take screenshots of those rendered 3D models. Those screenshots would then become 2D sprites. That said, graphics weren't the only things the game had going for it. The music was second to none. People still make OC remixes of Donkey Kong Country soundtracks because they're amazing, and the gameplay received top scores. At the time at least, everyone loved how challenging the game was, but in addition, it also had secret areas, mini-games, bonus levels. It just went on and on. They did such a good job with the game that Nintendo started questioning internally why other games being made by them specifically looked simple and pixelated by comparison, and how third-party developers like Rare were developing for the exact same hardware something that looked so much better. Nintendo would pressure their teams, including their lead creator Shigeru Miyamoto, who was working on a sequel to Super Mario World 2 at the time, to make the games look more cutting edge. Almost as if they felt shamed somehow by Rare's great success in Donkey Kong Country. They basically pointed the finger at Shigeru Miyamoto and said, "You make it look more like that," pointing at Rare. Shigeru responded by changing Super Mario World 2 into a game about Yoshi and Baby Mario, and changing the graphics to make it look like a little kid drew them as a kind of protest for the hyper-realism that he really didn't care about. He went on the record as saying, "Donkey Kong Country proves that players will put up with mediocre gameplay as long as the art is good." Rare responded promptly by replacing Donkey Kong, the Nintendo character, with 2 other Kongs. And while those games went on to be critical successes as well, it sowed the seeds of discord between Nintendo and Rare. Now, the quote itself isn't all that important. In fact, reportedly, Shigeru actually apologized for it later, but those seeds of discord that I was talking about, those are important. We'll get back to the Rare and Nintendo relationship in a little bit, but for now, let's skirt our way over to a different company called Argonaut. They were also developing games during the Nintendo's life cycle. They would famously use the Super FX chip in their cartridge for Starfox to emulate 3D on a console that could really only handle 2D. They would use a ton of tricks to accomplish this pseudo 3D, and would almost immediately after finishing the first one begin work on their next Star Fox game, Star Fox 2 for the SNES. As work on Star Fox 2 progressed though, Nintendo began to issue unrealistic demands toward Argonaut, telling them to rework sections of the game and make it on rails instead of being open world like Argonaut wanted. Nintendo more or less was trying to take control of the ongoing project. After issuing all kinds of demands, they finally just canceled the project outright, and as far as we know, not telling Argonaut why. Now, this was the time when Nintendo was making their transition to true 3D with their project known as Ultra 64. They were going to bank big, making this the most powerful console on the market, and they really touted the microprocessing power of the Ultra 64, which would become the Nintendo 64. Argonaut pitched them a 3D platformer concept starring Mario. They even created tech that would show off how a Mario platformer would go. Nintendo not only rejected it, but then they cut all ties with the company. So as Nintendo revealed this Nintendo 64 with Super Mario 64 as its flagship game, Argonaut realized that their design concept for the Super Mario platformer had been stolen by Nintendo. There were even accusations of the code that was in their demo being stolen and implemented or rewritten for use in the actual product Nintendo 64 that fans played. To this day, some people still say that Nintendo 64 runs on the code from Argonaut's original design concept. Sounds pretty shady, right? Well, it wouldn't be another year until they found out that the design concepts they had sent for Star Fox 2 were taken for use in Star Fox 64. They were not paid or given credit for them. Of course, depending on how their agreements worked, that may or may not have been stealing. As far as legalities go, we don't know. They were commissioned at the time, after all. And with Nintendo and its non-disclosure agreements, which are in practice even today, we may never know. Regardless, I think you can come to your own judgments based on the information that's available. But based on what I've heard from others, I'm inclined to believe Nintendo did them dirty. As for Argonaut themselves, the company would float around for several years in obscurity and would eventually be liquidated. If that wasn't bad enough, and this is a big one, remember that resentment I said Rare had for Nintendo due to the quote by Shigeru Miyamoto? Well, this all came to a head when Shigeru instructed Rare to take the 3D action adventure game they were working on known as Dinosaur Planet and rebrand it as a Starfox game, as their current project was more or less in a strict agreement with Nintendo. They didn't have any room to negotiate on that, as far as I know. So now the titular Dinosaur Planet would now be a never heard of before and never heard from again Dinosaur Planet existing in the Star Fox universe. When fans of the previous Star Fox games suggested this felt nothing like a Star Fox game, they were right. Getting sick of Nintendo's demands and having creative control taken from them, Rare sold themselves to Microsoft before Dinosaur Planet was even done. That way, they would never have to rely on Nintendo for funding again. Dinosaur Planet was rushed out the door so that they'd finish their business arrangement with Nintendo and no longer have to worry about them. There are many more examples of Nintendo doing things that people would consider shady in the gaming industry, but we're going to take a break from that, instead shifting our focus to the community. A game company is nothing without fans buying their products. Now, fans often get inspired by the things they like. This results in fan fiction, fan art, fan games, and fan sites. Early, when the internet was new, companies would aggressively defend their intellectual property rights by taking down anything and everything of theirs on the internet. Websites devoted to something as simple as The Simpsons would be taken down because The Simpsons doesn't belong to the owners of the website. Many companies followed suit, and one by one these companies began to realize something. Fans were getting pissed off, and they actually began to get turned off of these franchises one by one. These companies, in their active pursuit of their intellectual property rights, were damaging the brands they sought to cultivate. Now, I know a lot of people are going, well, they have to defend their intellectual property rights so they can lose them. Newsflash, everybody. You enjoy the protection of copyright on anything you create. It's not something that needs to be registered or actively searched for and defended. When you create intellectual property, you have the right to do with it what you will, and to allow or prevent other people from making derivative works based on it. Now this, and this is where confusion starts, this stands into sharp contrast with trademark, which you do have a legal obligation to defend. So if someone infringes on your legal trademark, starts selling things named Super Mario Brothers, then you are legally obligated to protect your trademark. Trademarks that are not protected can be lost. Trademarks that enter What are known as generalization, where they become a common part of culture, can be lost as well. An example of a lost trademark would be Kleenex. Kleenex tissues were originally a singular brand, and still are to this day, but other people can use the word Kleenex now because it became a generalized concept. Kleenex simply became another word for tissues. And everyone who dabbles in trademarks always is on the knife's edge there, so they have to actively seek to defend their stuff. Are you representing your fan work as an official work and trying to sell it on your own? That is infringement. Are you saying it's a derivative work, and you are acknowledging the proper copyright holder, stating that this is your derivative work based on this? You are giving credit to the official title holders? Then you're still technically infringing on it, but not to the point at which they need to actively go after you. You see, until the moment the company actually says, yeah, you can go ahead and make fan works as long as you aren't getting paid for it, you are actually infringing on the rights of the holder. And they can put an end to whatever you're doing, which is irritating as hell. Nowadays, most, but not all companies just kind of let it sit in a gray area, and they don't speak up until they see blatant damaging infringement, such as when a fan work not only competes directly with them, but receives money for doing so. These works are often shut down promptly, as they've gone too far. So in this sense, we're all infringing to one degree or another, with fan fiction, with fan art, with fan games, with fan sites. The overwhelming majority of developers, however, see the inherent value in allowing fans to continue to do so with either a blanket permission, or more often, a lack of objections. The lack of objections is a tool that allows them to single out at any time infringement they don't like. For example, creating pornography using in-game assets. Yes, Blizzard, I'm looking at you and Overwatch. In that case, the in-game assets make the porn look confusable to where someone would look at Overwatch and say, isn't that a porn game? When it isn't, obviously. But that is a case where they obviously try to break things up. Now, there's only one real exception to this copyright law, and that is fair use. Something most people don't understand. Fair use is a legal doctrine, not a law, that covers review and satire of products. The reason for fair use and critique is in order to protect consumers from defective or misrepresented products and to ensure customers get informed and truthful reviews without a company taking legal action against them. In the most simplest terms, fair use exists to stop a company from using legalities to strong-arm people into only having positive reviews out. Now, as for satire, comedy is apparent. This allows your average shows to take a clip from other people's content in order to create context for proper satire and comedy. This does not infringe on copyright. However, many of these cases still often go to court, and it takes a judge determining whether or not something is covered under fair use doctrine or not. Very often, things like fan fiction or fan games or fan films are simply put not review or satire. They happen to be something that inherently competes with the original product and are therefore not protected under fair use, which sucks. I think it's shitty, personally, but the law says otherwise, and, you know, reality versus emotions and all that. YouTube is facing multiple problems, however. First and foremost, aside from review and satire, there's no doctrine that says a Let's Play or a full playthrough is transformative in any way. That would be up to a court of law to decide. And the very probable result, based on what's happened with fan films in the past, is that Let's Plays are actually not fair use. But as far as I'm aware, there has been no ruling that has set legal precedent for Let's Plays one way or the other. The second major problem, however, is that YouTube does not actually use copyright law. It uses its own terms of service and claiming system. The claim system came into being after YouTube came into trouble with Viacom regarding several cases of copyright infringement. More or less, people were using YouTube as a dumping ground for pirated media. And in order to get themselves out of legal trouble, YouTube created the claiming system, and now they live by the claiming system. Although the details aren't known exactly how it went down, we assume they settled out of court in a way that we're just assuming they are bound to hold the claiming system up and not change it. As far as we know, YouTube doesn't even have the freedom to change the system. They're bound to use it. At least that's what we've come to believe. But the point of all this is, while you may have a legitimate review of a Nintendo product up, one that actually does legally fall under review or satire provisions of fair use doctrine under the law, YouTube's claiming system will disregard anything like that and take it down anyway at the whim of the copyright holder. Same applies to Content ID, but we'll get into the Content ID later. The purpose of this has been to explain, though, that if you've ever put up a fanfic, fan art, or fan game, you're technically violating copyright. Most of the time, smart companies have learned to simply ignore it and let fans do as they please because it's promoting their brand, and taking it down is damaging their brand. Nintendo, however, is different. Nintendo has indiscriminately gone after fan games and fan sites. Until fairly recently in the timeline, they even took down YouTube videos, just at the snap of a finger. However, at some point, they started seeing YouTube as a resource to be cultivated. Instead of taking YouTube videos down, they began to claim them using the automated claiming system. Anything that matches some of their core games, they claim it and take all the advertising revenue for themselves. As far as Let's Plays go, at this point in time, they basically have the legal right to do this until a court deems otherwise. But for reviews, for satire, for things like that, covered under fair use, they're taking them anyway. They're taking all of the income because they see it all, anything that uses their products, as a source of income to be exploited. Now, fans were furious and they did damage their brand quite a bit as a way of damage control, because Nintendo channels were becoming non-Nintendo channels real quick. Ever wonder why I don't cover as much Nintendo content as I normally would? Ever wonder why I'm not showing you a Nintendo video right now in the background? Well, that's because of their claiming system. Eventually, enough of their community decayed to where they came up with their creators program in order to save the few hyper-dedicated large YouTube channels which did Nintendo content. In this creator program, you could earn up to 60% of your share. Keep in mind I use the words up to, because those are the words they use. So up to 60% of the share Nintendo gets from YouTube. So YouTube takes their cut, Nintendo takes their cut, and then you get a bit after the fact. Every video that applies to this is vetted, and videos that contain third-party owned content or questionable content, I'm using air quotes for this, they can be taken down at Nintendo's whim. And you agree to it when you submit the video. Of course, they'll do it anyway, but you're more or less putting a spotlight on the video for them to vet. Vet means investigate to discover. Is Nintendo in their rights to do this? Yep. Should they? Oh, hell no. But they've effectively monetized all footage of all their content. That's why people like Jim Sterling use copyrighted music in the same video where they will show Nintendo footage, knowing that a copyright deadlock will occur. Monetization getting outright disabled on a video because Nintendo makes a claim, and then the Warner Music Group makes a claim, and YouTube says, I don't know who it belongs to, so they just deadlock the thing. But YouTubers are not the only ones affected by Nintendo's very controlling and anti-community attitude. Those hardest hit are the creators of fan games such as AM2R. For those of you who don't know, AM2R is short for Another Metroid 2 Remake. As the name suggests, it was a remake of the original Game Boy game of Metroid 2 Return of Samus. It turned that original short, fairly difficult game into an amazing game that had hours more content in it and a story. In other words, they took the original Metroid 2 and they made it into something far, far greater. If Nintendo had half a brain cell dedicated to how to properly use fan content, they would have approached this person to either license the content, to put it up on their virtual console, or they would have asked to have this guy help them develop a new one, which would have been the superior way to go. But they didn't. They did pretty much what they did with everything else. They had their lawyers, who actively seek out any kind of infringement, issue takedown notices. They killed the project. Now, I've got a copy of AM2R, and I will probably live stream it 1 or 2 times. Good luck ever seeing that on YouTube. Ho ho ho. But just think about it. This was the best Metroid thing created in years. It surpassed the original official game, but lacking the decency to allow fanworks to exist, and lacking the competence as developers to actually take superior ideas and integrate them, they sought the destructive course instead and alienated a huge chunk of their fan base. Similar things occurred to a project known as Full Screen Mario during the development of Mario Maker, because rather than make something better than the community or borrow from the community, Nintendo prefers to disrespect their own fans and take down the fan works because it's competing with us in some way. It's a simple case of corporate greed. They're set in their ways, they're way behind the curve, and the recent Switch promo proves it. Now, my biggest criticism about Nintendo over the years has been their strict adherence to gimmicks, such as motion controls. Motion controls that made Star Fox Zero a game that I genuinely disliked, when Star Fox 64, the game it was modeled after, was one of my favorite games of its generation. The Switch taught us that through these Joy-Con controllers, they want to issue out even more gimmicks. Having a motion sensor module attached to each Joy-Con, they very well may be setting up another round of gimmicky games I have no intention of playing. Which is unfortunate, because as I mentioned at the beginning of this, The Legend of Zelda, Super Mario Bros., Metroid, and Mega Man were my go-to franchises. And while Mega Man has gone the way of the dodo, the others have the potential to be revived in good forms on the Switch. And the thought of using the Switch as a gaming tablet on the go, or in hotel rooms while traveling, or things of that nature, seems like it would be a pretty damn awesome concept. Unfortunately, at this point, I'm not willing to trust Nintendo not to fall back into its old ways again. I want to see amazing things like a new successor to the Zelda games, Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages. I want to see a brand new, in-the-air Starfox game that isn't dependent on motion controls. There's so many more things I want to see from Nintendo, and my fear is that we will not see them on the Switch. That the Switch is going to be the next Wii U. If it is, you won't see me with one. And I think that's Nintendo's big problem, is instead of creating more of what people wanted, specifically older fans such as myself, because keep in mind that if you are a kid who likes what Nintendo's put out in the past couple years, then again, this video isn't for you. We're talking from the perspective of an older gamer who has played everything Nintendo has put out since they started doing video games, since they stopped being a card shop in Japan. I think the GameCube was the last console they made that I really paid attention to. While I did play a few Wii games, those were by the virtue of a friend's machine, because I simply didn't see it worthwhile. And their third-party support was nil, but that is the one point where Nintendo may yet redeem itself. If things like Skyrim and other games take off on the Switch. Unfortunately, while Bethesda and 2K have entered into business relations with Nintendo, and it looks like Nintendo very well may be able to do this. The creators of other games, such as Titanfall, they look at the Switch as a joke. One that simply wouldn't be able to have their level of gameplay at their graphical fidelity at that fast a pace. It wouldn't support everything they'd want to do. They see it as a gimmicky children's toy. And that's unfortunate because I do see the inherent value in a console that can be played on the go or on the television. If Nintendo rescinded their ludicrous policy as far as Content ID went, I'd even go so far as to get an Elgato and start capturing Switch gameplay. But that's not going to happen. At least I don't think it's going to happen. And that's because Nintendo is Nintendo. And I hate them as a company. But based on all their past creations, all the ones before they got caught up in this gimmicky bullshit, I really loved them as creators. And I think I still do love their creations even to this day. Now, a lot of people, when defending Nintendo, will reference the great video game crash as a reason to support Nintendo, saying that Nintendo saved the gaming industry. Contrary to popular opinion, however, there was no video game crash outside the United States. It was not a worldwide phenomenon, and no, gaming in the United States was not the entire world. A lot of those third-party developers I mentioned earlier in this video were British. There are video game developers right now who are very high-end who are French. There are even better ones who come from Poland. My point is, while the United States had this destruction of Atari, the big failure of E.T., none of that affected Europe. None of that affected Asia. So any arguments how Nintendo saved the world of gaming are basically half-baked, because someone else would have taken the throne, if not them. There were plenty of contenders in the world. Nintendo just happened to have been first. For me to be able to forgive Nintendo, they need to get off their current Content ID policy, but they're not going to, because Nintendo is a company, and as a company, they are assholes. What I foresee myself doing in the future is buying a Switch used to make sure Nintendo doesn't get the money, buy the games used, and never ever activate their pay-for online service. And that's a shame, because I really do like what they have created in the past. But I highly recommend anyone who is still blindly loyal to this company, do some research. See what they've done to fellow creators, what they've done to fan projects, what they've done to third-party developers, the good ones, the ones who are responsible for some of the best franchises we've ever seen. Nintendo's done so many people dirty. They played afoul with the industry. This is a matter of fact. This is not slander or libel. These are facts that are known. Fanboyism is terrible. So let's sit back and wait and see what the future holds for Nintendo. This isn't just me being critical about Nintendo. This is a plea to get on Nintendo's case and tell them what they're doing is not okay. This is a call not to be a Nintendo baby, not to blindly accept all the things Nintendo as a company says, because Nintendo as a company is one thing and Nintendo as creators are entirely different. As creators, they've got some geniuses on board, but as a company, they've proven themselves to be scumbags, at least in my opinion. Before I go, here are some words from my guest, Digital Boundaries.
I want to take a moment to thank Zarek and his entire community over on his channel for letting me on here and talking a little bit about Nintendo and Sony and all the history behind all this. If you want to check out my channel, I do a lot of news, retro plays, and live streaming. Come check me out. Just go on YouTube and search for DBFig, or go to Digital Boundaries. That's the name of my channel. Or if you want to, here's the actual YouTube channel link. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, just go to @DBFig. As always, guys, thank you for your support, and thank you for being awesome.
Thank you all for watching. If this video has made you think a little bit, which it should, that's the whole point, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, that's okay. You can give it a thumbs down too. But either way, leave a comment, tell me what you think, and what you think Nintendo could do to be a better company and better creators. I urge you guys to compare Nintendo's attitude to that of other companies. Either way, click the links on screen for more content, and I will see y'all next time.